What if the car sitting in your driveway becomes a problem no mechanic wants to fix? Not because it's broken, but because the company behind it quietly vanishes. By 2026, 11 major car brands may cease to exist. If you own one, resale value, warranty coverage, and parts availability can collapse overnight. Some brands are already past the point of no return, and number one is far worse than anyone realizes. Let's start with a brand whose European future hangs by a thread. Number 11, Ford. Ford isn't just cutting jobs, it's abandoning entire markets. 14,000 European positions eliminated by 2027. Germany loses 2,900 jobs. The UK loses 800. The Cologne plant, once positioned as Ford's EV future in Germany, dropped to single-shift operations in January 2026 after cutting 1,000 jobs. Ford now holds just 3.3% of the European market, with roughly 260,000 vehicles sold through mid-2025. That volume cannot support the fixed costs of independent platform development. Here's what that means for you. Ford's borrowing technology from Volkswagen's MEB platform first. Then in December 2025, Reuters reported Ford and Renault agreed to co-develop affordable EVs, with the first joint model arriving in 2028 at a Renault plant in France. Ford's CEO called it a fight for their lives. The timeline creates a gap Ford must bridge with whatever they have on hand. The Puma Gen E crossover launches. Commercial vehicle strength continues. But the small car segments that historically anchored Ford in Europe keep shrinking. When you outsource your entry-level EV strategy to competitors, you stop being an independent volume brand. You become a badge on someone else's hardware with all the dependency risks that entails. Dealer networks shrink as volume declines. Parts pipelines consolidate under alliance partners. Resale confidence evaporates when buyers see a brand losing its independence. By 2026, Ford operates more like a van specialist with a couple of crossovers. The brand survives. The European presence thins considerably, but retreat can look different when it's happening globally. Number 10, Nissan. Nissan's European presence faces managed decline, and the signs are unmistakable. The company cut 87 roles at its European regional office in France during November 2025. That facility employed around 570 people total, so this reduction strips away the coordination layer that manages launches, pricing, and dealer support across European markets. The global backdrop makes the European situation worse. Nissan announced 11,000 additional job cuts globally in May 2025, shutting 7 of its 17 production plants. The fiscal year 2024 results showed operating profit at just 69.8 billion yen on 12.6 trillion yen in revenue, a 0.6% margin. AP reported the fiscal year ending March 2025 brought a net loss of 670.9 billion yen, roughly $4.5 billion. European buyers face a specific risk. Nissan's near-term small EV strategy relies entirely on the Renault alliance. The electric Micra uses Renault's Ampere small platform and gets built by Renault in France. The next-generation Leaf will be manufactured in Sunderland, but the core point remains. Nissan cannot profitably engineer its own European small EV fast enough to compete independently. The International Council on Clean Transportation named Nissan among manufacturers with larger CO2 compliance gaps in 2025. That forces costly sales mix changes or credit purchases. When you're cutting costs globally while facing European emissions pressure and relying on alliance platforms, the freedom to invest in brand-specific products evaporates completely. When a brand cannot engineer its own products independently, every decision becomes a negotiation. Dealer confidence weakens. Parts availability depends on alliance priorities. Resale values reflect that uncertainty. At least Nissan is still selling cars. The next brand chose to stop entirely. Number 9, Jaguar. Jaguar committed to the riskiest brand strategy in modern automotive history, and the clock is ticking. They stopped selling new cars in the UK from November 2024, ending their entire current model lineup ahead of a planned 2026 relaunch as a pure electric ultra-luxury brand with €100,000 minimum pricing. This creates a multi-year product drought, where dealers must survive on servicing and used cars alone. Dealers need new cars to drive finance products, trade-ins, and customer traffic. When that flow stops, retailers consolidate or pivot to other franchises. JLR's annual report for fiscal year 2025 explicitly referenced the gradual wind-down of legacy Jaguar products, with many reaching end of production by December 2024. The reinvention itself carries timeline risk. Reuters reported in July 2025 that JLR delayed electric Range Rover and electric Jaguar models while cutting their fiscal 2026 margin forecast. Even if the first all-new EV arrives in 2026 as planned, any slip compresses the window for dealers holding their breath. External shocks hit during this vulnerable transition. Reuters reported JLR paused U.S. shipments for a month in April 2025 to handle 25% tariffs. In October 2025, quarterly volumes fell significantly due to a nearly 6-week shutdown following a cyber attack. If new models arrive late, at prices that narrow the market too far, or with early quality issues, Jaguar becomes a design-led halo with very low volume. Longer waits for specialist parts. Fewer local technicians trained on the new platform. Less certainty for used buyers trying to sell vehicles from a brand in limbo. That's the consumer-facing reality of a brand becoming a shadow of itself. Some brands at least kept selling while their strategy unraveled. Number 8. Seat. Seat's profit didn't decline. It collapsed in a way that defies normal market dynamics. Record operating profit of €633 million in 2024. Then 2025 arrived, and operating profit collapsed to €16 million through the first 9 months, down 96.2%, despite sales revenue climbing 6.9%. A drop of that magnitude signals a company absorbing external shocks it cannot pass through to customers. The Cupra-Tavascan situation exposes the structural problem. Built in China, Seat leadership repeatedly warned EU tariffs could eliminate the model's viability. Reuters reported in February 2025 that Seat's CEO warned if the EU didn't reduce the tariff, Seat could be forced to cut output and lay off about 1,500 workers. The tariff reportedly totaled 30.7%, costing hundreds of millions of euros in 2025. Seat's new CEO was quoted by El País in September 2025, saying, "It's impossible to make an electric car with Seat if they want to make money." The mainstream badge concedes it cannot profitably do what regulation demands on the timetable regulation wants. Meanwhile, Seat inaugurated a battery assembly plant in Martorell, part of a €3 billion plan to launch 2 EV models in 2026. That infrastructure ties to products narratively led by Cupra. El País described Cupra as leading electrification, while Seat strengthens Ibiza and Arona updates instead. If the plant becomes Cupra first, Seat remains alive as a badge while hollowing in strategic relevance. Fewer new products, less marketing oxygen. Rising chance that shoppers get steered toward Cupra or VW instead. Number 7. Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo's situation shifted from product excitement to strategic hesitation, and the delays tell the real story. Stellantis positioned the brand as its European luxury spearhead, with plans for new models every year until 2026. That plan was meant to underwrite dealer confidence. The reality unfolding tells a different story. The clearest signal arrived in May 2025, when Reuters reported Alfa Romeo would postpone the launch of its next-generation Stelvio SUV, originally slated for 2025 or early 2026 sales. Sources told Reuters the postponed launch tied to an ongoing reassessment of strategy amid tepid demand for electric vehicles. The language matters. Stellantis is reassessing strategies rather than executing a firm product timetable. Industry reporting elaborated that the next Stelvio will now include hybrid and mild hybrid variants. Deliveries won't begin until at least September 2026. Critical product launch timing overlaps with the threshold year for brand viability. Another data point involves extending production for current core models, the Giulia sedan and Stelvio SUV, through 2027. That extension signals the promised next-generation reset is being pushed back, stretching outdated ICE and hybrid architecture into a period of tightening European emissions regulations. An Alfa that stays on an aging platform into 2027 will likely face weaker residual values relative to competitors with fresh EV architecture. Dealers hesitate to invest in inventory that doesn't align with regulatory imperatives. This dynamic already appears in remarketing channels, pricing second-hand viability. When you finance cars long-term, this is where people get trapped, still paying while values collapse faster than the loan balance decreases. You end up underwater on a vehicle from a brand that can't commit to its own product roadmap. When established brands struggle, you'd expect newer ones to step in. That's not happening. Number 6. Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi's European trajectory shows resource rationing at its most revealing. The core signal came in May 2025, when Mitsubishi officially announced it had withdrawn from its planned investment in Renault's electric vehicle business Ampere. They opted against the previously promised €200 million commitment. Mitsubishi's statement confirmed they would continue to develop new cars based on Renault models rather than investing in platform development. That decision indicates Mitsubishi assessed the cost of meaningful EV investment as outweighing near-term return. A brand that chooses OEM platform sourcing over its own investment essentially outsources its core product strategy. It saves near-term cash while locking competitiveness to another company's roadmap. A June 2025 Reuters report confirmed Mitsubishi aims to lift European sales by 20 to 30% through deploying 2 new Renault-based models. That represents alliance dependency rather than independent strategy. The forthcoming fully electric Eclipse Cross and other EV models for Europe are built on Renault's Ampere architecture. This creates structural fragility where platform roadmap changes at Renault can instantly alter Mitsubishi's options. If Renault pivots its European pricing or allocation, Mitsubishi dealers may have zero control over pipeline prioritization. For European consumers, the consequence could be a dealership network that feels less like Mitsubishi and more like Renault with different badges. When you walk into a Mitsubishi dealer, you're essentially looking at rebadged products at potentially higher prices with a smaller support network. That gradual erosion carries real risk to resale values and parts support confidence. Buyers start questioning why they should pay Mitsubishi prices for Renault engineering. Luxury brands face similar pressures, just at higher price points. Number 5. Maserati. Maserati's situation became a textbook example of declining volume and halted electrification, and the numbers are brutal. The most unmistakable signal came in March 2025 when Reuters reported Stellantis-owned Maserati canceled plans for an electric version of its MC20 sports car. The reason cited: expected limited demand for high-cost EVs in its segment. This cancellation sits atop broader performance indicators showing collapsed sales. Reuters reported a steep decline from roughly 26,600 units in 2023 to just 11,300 vehicles sold in 2024, alongside an adjusted operating loss of €260 million. When a luxury maker's sales halve in a single year while posting significant losses, internal capital allocation tightens. A November 2024 union report confirmed by Reuters documented that Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares failed to confirm previously announced electrification plans for Maserati during union discussions. This absence of affirmation underscores a lack of clear strategic commitment at the highest level. In June 2025, Maserati's leadership acknowledged the brand's business plan was being reviewed. The new plan was touted to include product planning and a re-evaluation of dealer and assistance networks. That focus on dealer relationship redesign signals instability in how the brand will be supported. After the MC20 cancellation, no substantial new product debut was scheduled. In a European market where premium buyers increasingly prize EV options and regulators push for compliance, a luxury brand without a clear EV pipeline risks sitting outside the fastest-growing segment. The volume slump combined with losses translates into dealer reluctance to stock inventory and constrained parts budgets. When you're paying premium prices for a Maserati, you expect premium support. That support network weakens when dealer confidence collapses. Even brands born electric aren't immune to capital constraints. Number 4. Polestar. Polestar's European presence shows how EV brand promise collides with capital scarcity. And the financial reality is stark. Polestar began as a joint initiative between Volvo Cars and Geely Holding. A February 2024 Reuters report confirmed Volvo Cars would stop funding Polestar and transfer responsibility to Geely Holding. That shift materially changed the brand's strategic backing. This withdrawal of direct Volvo funding represents a realignment where Geely now bears disproportionate capital burdens for Polestar's growth. European buyers perceive dealer confidence, warranty program robustness, and parts replenishment discipline, structures that weaken when brand funding is in flux. From a financial standpoint, Polestar has been losing money at scale. A September 2025 Reuters report documented a net loss of $1.03 billion in the June quarter, compared to a loss of $268 million a year earlier. Significant impairment charges tied to U.S. tariffs and pricing pressure appeared. That 2025 loss indicates a deep structural challenge in converting pricing power into sustainable profits. Multiple reports documented job cuts and R&D downsizing. In late 2025, Polestar closed its 2 UK research facilities and laid off 130 staff. These workforce actions directly affect the brand's ability to support product development, dealer training, and localized software updates. The funding landscape illustrates a pivot that carries risk. While Polestar raised $200 million in June 2025, this reduced Volvo's stake and increased Geely's controlling share to roughly 66%. That signals ongoing capital needs and strategic direction increasingly shaped by Geely rather than a balanced partnership. The path to a self-sustaining European network by 2026 is narrow and contingent. When you're financing an expensive EV from a brand with uncertain backing, you're taking on more risk than the showroom suggests. Some brands solve compliance through accounting instead of engineering. Number 3. Suzuki. Suzuki's position in Europe shifted from mainstream competitor to corporate actor using regulatory workarounds, and it reveals fundamental weakness. In March 2025, Suzuki formally entered a CO2 emissions pool with Tesla to meet EU carbon rules. The pool included Tesla, Mazda, Ford, Toyota, Subaru, Honda, and Suzuki. This represents compliance strategy rather than product strategy. Suzuki relies on zero-emission credits of other manufacturers rather than its own battery electric volume to reduce its regulatory footprint. EU fleet CO2 targets for 2025 to 2027 are stringent enough that manufacturers who fail individually face fines potentially reaching 15 billion euros industry-wide. The compliance mechanism allows averaging emissions across multiple brands through pools. A manufacturer like Suzuki, with historically low EV volume, can use partners' figures to mask its own shortfalls. This functions as a pressure valve. Instead of investing in a deep lineup of Suzuki-branded electrified vehicles, The company bought regulatory breathing room. Suzuki's inclusion in the Tesla pool is telling. It means its own product pipeline cannot deliver fleet averages low enough to meet EU standards within the 2025 to 2027 window. That structural math matters for European buyers. Downstream dealer economics suffer when a brand cannot hit CO2 targets without pooling. Its negotiating leverage with dealers shrinks. European consumers increasingly price emissions compliance risk into residual values. A brand needing external credits to hit targets will likely struggle to justify high used values where competitors generate compliance organically through their own EV offerings. Suzuki's use of pooling signals organic EV development remains insufficient without partnership. When you buy a Suzuki in Europe, you're buying from a brand solving regulatory problems through accounting rather than engineering. That's not sustainable. When individual brands struggle, sometimes entire corporate groups face existential questions. Number 2. Stellantis. Stellantis' current strategy under new CEO Antonio Filosa shows the group in explicit portfolio triage mode, and multiple brands hang in the balance. In December 2025, Reuters reported that Filosa's turnaround plan involves fixing weak margins while explicitly assessing the viability of Stellantis' 14 brands. Trimming some brands due to overlap, especially in Europe, sits on the table. This marks a clear departure from prior management. A transition from never cutting brands to actively assessing cuts represents the strategic inflection point. Stellantis no longer defends its portfolio breadth as sacrosanct. It prices brand existence against hard metrics of profitability, overlap, and industrial scale. Filosa was appointed CEO in June 2025 and tasked with reversing a 15% drop in sales in North America. He's reprioritizing affordable volume and fleet sales over niche or experimental EV targets. Stellantis has historically counted on hybrid and EV growth to justify investments in premium and niche brands. If the core volume engine stalls, capital available to subsidize smaller marquees shrinks. Filosa took over after a 70% drop in net profit in 2024 and a €6 billion cash loss. That financial backdrop dramatically alters the cost of preserving low-volume marques. Brands with low sales volume, minimal scale, and overlapping segments are under scrutiny. Analyst warnings have become explicit. Multiple sources identified DS Automobiles, Lancia, and Alfa Romeo as brands potentially most exposed if Stellantis trims its portfolio. Reuters reported analysts see premium, low-volume marquees like DS and Lancia among the most likely candidates for divestment or discontinuation. When you own a car from a brand being actively evaluated for elimination, you're sitting on a depreciating asset with an uncertain support network. Values drop faster than normal depreciation curves. You're absorbing losses tied to corporate portfolio decisions. One brand embodies this vulnerability more than any other. Number 1, DS Automobiles. DS Automobiles exemplifies portfolio pressure within Stellantis, and it's far worse than most people realize. It operates as a premium, low-volume brand with minimal standalone scale, embedded in a corporate group built around volume and cost absorption rather than niche luxury. Multiple industry sources directly flagged DS as potentially vulnerable if Stellantis prunes its lineup. This matters because Stellantis' global scale strategy puts a premium on brands generating broad sales across multiple regions. DS's sales figures in 2025 illustrate why that model strains. Reports indicate DS registrations in Europe fell about 21.2% through October 2025 to roughly 25,195 units, giving it about 0.2% market share. Losing share where competitors consolidate electrified lineups and push down costs doesn't just weaken short-term profitability, it undermines strategic justification within a large group under cost pressure. Portfolio prioritization becomes ruthless in a downturn environment where electrification costs are rising. A brand contributing a tiny fraction of volume and sitting in a highly competitive premium space is far easier to question internally than core volume brands like Peugeot or Jeep. The fact that insiders say assessing viability includes DS means its survival remains contingent on strategic reinforcement that isn't yet visible in hard investments. Network and dealer confidence follows sales velocity. Dealers in multi-brand groups choose allocation and staffing based on sales performance. A brand operating at roughly 0.2% share is unlikely to get the same showroom space, technician training, and inventory priority that higher volume peers receive. DS launched the DS No. 8 electric crossover in April 2025, representing strategic investment. Yet it launches into a premium niche within an already crowded EV luxury space, dominated by incumbents, while facing intense Chinese competition at lower price points. DS sits in the quadrant of strategic vulnerability, premium positioning with limited scale, and corporate leadership openly reassessing long-term viability. When dealer confidence collapses, resale values follow, and once that happens, owners absorb the loss, not the manufacturer. Most buyers don't realize these risks until they're already locked in. Now you know what to avoid, and why timing matters more than brand loyalty.